Good morning, Catherine, and good morning, Mischa.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Mischa, would you like to introduce yourself since I'm not competent at that?
Well, we just met.
That's true, so I don't really know you.
Yes. Hi, I'm Mischa Cohen Peck, sometimes called Dr. Peck. I am a local psychotherapist and EMDR therapist. You gave me a funny look.
I didn't know what EMDR stands for.
EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization reprocessing. It's a type of therapy. It's used a lot with trauma. It's used a lot. Let me rephrase this. EMDR has to do with bilateral stimulation or dual attention stimuli. So if you think about what happens during REM sleep, rapid eye movement, our eyes are moving back and forth, sometimes in slightly different directions, but that movement is accessing a healing process of the brain. During REM sleep, we're trying to categorize data, trying to understand things that have happened in the world, trying to reconcile our past. That's what REM dreams are about. When we can access that same natural healing process, however, a client can be awake, alert, totally aware of what's going on, totally in control, not being hypnotized, not being told what to think, but we can access the healing networks, and there's all sorts of protocols and ways that we do that. That's EMDR. Eye movement desensitization reprocessing may not be the best name for what it is, but it really describes that process of getting that eye movement, or we can do tactile, or we can do audio and access the healing networks of the brain.
I just heard a podcast, fairly short 3.5 hour podcast about sleep, and they talked a lot about, obviously, rapid eye movement sleep and non-rapid eye movement, and how you can access some of those states while you're conscious. And
yes,
they're trying to do some more research on meditation, because that's one way to consciously affect that. And there's some interesting studies that show that people who are very good at meditating tend to need a lot less sleep, and they still haven't made a correlation between whether that's healthy or not, because sleep is apparently a very necessary part of survival.
Well, there's also a lot of work being done looking at various psychoactive, so-called illicit drugs,
Right.
and how do we use these drugs to access parts of the brain and help people heal, and use them in conjunction with psychotherapy and treatments. And some interesting work has been done with trauma, particularly with childhood trauma or post-traumatic stress disorder, things like veterans or other survivors.
Interesting.
Yeah, there's a whole part of our strange relationship with drugs in this country that has taken a lot of what look to be very promising drugs and stigmatized them to the point where we can't even think about using them. Timothy Leary, not Thomas Leary. I don't know who Thomas Leary is, but Timothy Leary,
Timothy's cousin,
started making had some interesting experimental work done with LSD, and then because of the cultural shift and bizarre response that the United States had, we've shut all that down, and people are starting to poke at it around the fringes again, and it seems like that it's had remarkable results.
Well, if I think back to my late teens, there were some pretty remarkable results with some of the illicit substances I may have tried.
Please, go on.
No, very, very little. But I was an activist in Los Angeles with ACT UP and Queer Nation, and we had some crazy crowds and wild parties, but we were wearing the combat boots and marching in the streets, and there were a few opportunities to delve into things that might have been, maybe my mother wouldn't have approved. But
was it helpful?
You know what's interesting, Catherine, and I love that you asked me that question, because I'm sitting here on one side, I'm literally thinking about the audience and what would I say to a kid, and what would I want a kid to know, or what would I want one of my clients to know if they were listening. And on the other side, I'm thinking, well, let's go with reality. And the funniest thing is they're merging, because they're actually sort of the same thing. Yes and no. It wasn't helpful, and it was helpful. It wasn't helpful in that I didn't have any grand aha moment, no great awakening, nothing dramatic, nothing that would have been a Hollywood film. At the same time, when I think back on those events, and they were very limited, but they were significant, I had some glimpses into the ways that I was restraining myself in life, the ways that I wanted to be authentic, but the drugs weren't going to give me the path to be more authentic. They gave me glimpses into who I was going to evolve into. So that boy who I once was seen as, named Michael, or labeled Michael, saw some glimpses into the freedom that I live with now as Mischa at this point in my transition as I've become more genuine and more authentic.
Interesting.
So yes and no
Okay.
is the answer.
That's fair.
Well, it seemed the logical takeaway from that, anybody who's having problems with self-identity in any way should be required to take LSD.
Personally, I liked ecstasy, but
Okay,
that's
whatever
another
works
story.
for you. I mean, you're the clinician here, so...
Yes, and I am not advocating for anyone to be
Right,
doing
right.
illicit drugs
Right.
because I cannot.
Right.
All these illicit drugs do have the potential to interact with other medications.
Exactly.
And that's always a risk factor. And one of the other things with a lot of these illicit type drugs is for some of us, it can have, there can be adverse reactions that are very difficult because sometimes these drugs also give us a window into things that we've repressed that may not be things that we were ready or anticipating that we were going to work on. Now, I could say that I repressed my gender identity, and drugs and substances may have helped me to, release some of that in a sense or see some of it. But we also know that some of these substances can release historical trauma. The body remembers everything. The body does not lie. The body keeps the score. There's all these phrases. Well, that trauma can find its way out, and it can be a good thing. But if I'm not in a situation where I have the resources to deal with the trauma at that moment while I'm high, or shortly thereafterwards, it can become a big challenge. That's not to say we shouldn't do it. I don't know. I can't tell somebody what they should or shouldn't do.
Right.
But
Well, unfortunately, right now, I think we're at the very beginning of the point where we can start to use it in a therapy session.
yes.
Hopefully, we can get to that point because, like I said, some of the early data suggests that it's going to be very powerful. But that is one way to mitigate the potential problems. First of all, there are, even though we don't have a lot of data on it yet, there are clearly some profiles of people who shouldn't be doing different types of drugs because of the potential downside. But also, if you're working with a clinician, they can work you through whatever process, whatever trip you're having.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing is that clinicians, for use of these illicit psychoactive drugs, I mean, you really do need training and experience. To deal with the aftermath is a different story. There are many, many more therapists who can work with a client who's had the bad trip, who's had the challenge, who's looking at aspects of themselves that they were not anticipating or perhaps didn't believe they were ready to see. I sort of come from the world of it's all grist for the mill.
Right.
If you saw it, you were ready to see it. You were ready to know. It's just scary sometimes.
That's the key. I think it's worth repeating. These drugs could be very effective with a therapist, with someone who's trained
Yes.
to know what they're doing. And it brings you back to the point, we're not recommending anyone do this on their own because, A, it's better to have guidance. I mean, you wouldn't go around injecting yourself with ivermectin willy-nilly, would you? Unless you had a parasite. And the other thing was, if it's illicit, you don't actually know what you're getting.
Exactly.
So stick with a clinician.
Well stated. Thank you.
And what you mentioned along that discussion, your trans identity. So you are a trans woman. How do you prefer being referred? Do you mind being called a trans woman?
So here's a reality. So many of us, Americans in particular, but in many places across the world, we are born and we are inserted into this false binary or a false dichotomy, male-female. It's not one or the other. First of all, it's an and.
Right.
It's male and female. In fact, try this in life. Every time you use the word or, replace or with and watch what happens. Watch how you start to expand your understanding of things. It is male and female, but when that binary is imposed, I'm supposed to be one or the other. And so here's the reality. Even though I have transitioned, and some would say I have significantly transitioned, some might say I've completed my transition. Transition's the lifespan, so I don't know what completed means. I never can be a cisgender or a biological female because I was born with a male sex body. So I am a trans woman. I am a trans person. I am never cisgender. Cis means same. Trans means across. So cisgender means your gender identity is the same as the sex assigned at birth. You're cisgender. I can't be cisgender, so I am a trans woman. It's a long answer to a simple question.
No, it's not a simple question. I don't think it is.
I don't think it's simple either.
Yeah, you're right. It's not simple.
It's not simple.
The only caveat that's been bothering me is that I feel like this generation of kids is, 'cause my son is 16 and he's got a lot of non-binary friends. They seem like they're putting a very strict binary interpretation of what male and female is, and behaviorally especially. And when I was growing up, it was understood you could be a man and you could be gay and you could be effeminate and still be straight. Or there was just a lot more that male encompassed and female encompassed. It seemed like there was a lot more fungible. And it may be just the way I'm reading things from a height of 50 years old, looking down at the 20-year-olds and the 15-year-olds and seeing and just misinterpreting what they're talking about. But that's the only thing that kind of bothered me, that it seems to be pigeonholing with the identity of male and female.
One of the interesting things is so many of these labels are in reaction to the binary, to male and female. And just by being in reaction to, we're also verifying or validating this idea of male and female. So it highlights that while it also sheds light on other ways. It's interesting that what we're talking about are labels. And labels are fascinating because labels are socially constructed, and it's a way that the brain tries to understand something. And if I can give it a label, I can say it's this or it's that. Notice I used or.
Right.
And if I can categorize something, then my brain thinks it understands it.
Right.
And so the reaction that I have to so many of these labels is like, great. I love that people are finding a label that describes them, an identity. But a label by definition is restrictive.
Yes.
Because now it puts you into a box. And how many of us do well in boxes? We don't. We fall out of boxes. Boxes break. Boxes evolve across time. The cardboard wears down. I'm growing and I learn that, oh, I am different. I have no regrets that I spent 40-some years of my life as Michael Peck. He was a pretty good guy. He kept me alive. He got a lot of education. He did great. I learned across time or through time who I am more authentically, which is a wonderful thing. What an incredible privilege that I was able to spend time exploring my gender and have access to the resources, medicine, healthcare providers, surgeons, etc., so that I could transition in a way that worked for me. And that way may be different than the way that it works for someone else. But what a gift to just have this privilege of being authentic, of being who I truly am, and feeling comfortable in my own body.
Well, I think the danger with the labels, too, is that you feel like you know what you're talking about.
Oh, yeah.
And you don't understand. I mean, this is the thing. People complain about dictionaries because you can look up a word and you can understand what it means by the dictionary term. But that's usually a very narrow slice of what the word means. So it doesn't mean you understand the word or the concept it's trying to convey. And humans are very good at pattern recognition. And I think that happens in ideas as well. So once you think you understand something, you've kind of locked it away and you're not really thinking about it anymore. And this, I think, stops a lot of empathy from happening. And empathy, once you start thinking about trying to put yourself in someone else's shoes and thinking about what they're going through, it makes it a lot easier to empathize with them and try to be a little bit more understanding. That's the thing that really bothers me about people who are very, I don't want to say anti-trans or just who want to put other people in boxes. It's like, think about what they're going through, because it's probably a lot harder journey than what you had.
You're poetic with your words, James.
That's very kind of you to say.
You are. You're very thoughtful. And what I'm hearing in this is critical thinking breeds empathy. If I think critically, if I try to understand something more thoroughly, if I try to delve in to a topic, or what I do sitting in an office with a client, trying to delve into their mind, trying to understand what's inside. How does their mind work? How do they understand the world? How do they see things? The more I focus on trying to understand more critically, and I don't mean criticizing, I mean critically in getting them, in asking some thoughtful questions and gathering more data, not only am I reflecting that back to them, I'm also empathizing, and I'm getting deeper and deeper in connection, in relationship, and in understanding.
I think that's amazing. It sounds like a superpower because I have no ability to sit down with someone like that, especially at least someone I don't really know. So it seems like a superpower to be able to do that. I mean, I'm happy to sit here all day and tell society how it should be run, but I couldn't sit down with an individual person because I'd be like, well, I don't know.
It's very interesting because I try my best not to tell someone what to do.
Right.
My job is to get people to give themselves their own advice. And it's not that I'm trying to trick you into saying the right words. It's that the person who knows the answer is you. I'm just trying to help elicit it from you.
One question I have, and it kind of gets back to like your son at the age where there's a lot of non-binary friends. Several of my friends have like non-binary children, post-adolescence, early 20s. And in terms of like that, you know, how we're socialized with the binary, do you think that they're approaching this in an authentic way, or is it what's happening now? I mean, it kind of reminds me in some ways of the women's movement at the beginning in the 70s. It's like when all of a sudden everyone was, you know, removing their bras and doing all this like drama stuff. Yeah, exactly. And now it's that representation in terms of almost like caricaturization in terms of like their binary identity.
Are you asking whether you think they're being authentic?
Yeah, I don't know. It's like, or is this just part of the process as we start adapting to new ways of thinking and more expansive ways of thinking? Is that the process?
What a wonderful concept to bring up and questions to ask. And this is why I love talking with you, Catherine. I love being your friend. So just so everyone knows, Catherine and I are personal friends.
Yes, we are.
So nothing is inauthentic.
Okay.
Nothing. How could it be?
Okay.
I am totally authentic in all the ways I deluded myself, you know, when I knew I was trans and I was fighting it.
Okay.
When I weaned myself off of hormones for 8 months, 9 months, and acted like this was the wrong thing and I shouldn't be. That was authentic. Because that was what I needed on my journey at that point in time. So I do my best to never question someone's authenticity. And there's that 3-letter word. And I believe you might be right, Catherine, that this is part of a movement. This is part of a process. And maybe, circling back to earlier conversation, one of the goals is that we actually get to a point where we are removing the idea of binary, that we no longer have to be in reaction to male and female, but we just have a gender identity, or I'm gender free, and I just am. I get to be human, and I get to do what works for me. You know, it's interesting because, you know, we're born in a world where we download so much data even before we're born. We're downloading data in the womb, you know, transgenerational transmission of fill in the blank, trauma, faith systems, etc., belief systems. And we're downloading data, and then we are observing so much at the beginning of life, and we are observing gender.
Yes.
I mean, we're not just lighting forest fires with gender. Gender reveal parties and all
Oh,
that bullshit.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was crazy. Oh, my
It's
God.
incredibly crazy. But, you know, maybe part of what we're moving to is a world where we can be more free of these social barriers, these social constraints of gender. Because honestly, gender is nothing. And I'm stealing this from a documentary. And gender is everything. At the same time, it's nothing and it's everything.
Yeah, that's a good answer.
That is a good answer.
One of the things I think of as being a hallmark of intelligence is being able to hold two different ideas in your mind at the same time. And I think that's what you're talking about a little bit there. So I'm calling you very intelligent.
Am I being authentic?
Well, you're saying smart things, so it doesn't really matter.
I hope I am. You know.
I think as long as you're being truthful, I don't think that I'm too concerned about what messaging we're giving.
Yeah.
Because for me, truth is very important. It's like the most important thing.
And there are multiple truths that coexist at the same time. And sorry to burst someone's bubble. I hope I don't burst someone's bubble, but there are facts. And there are facts that do exist. And we know that facts can be changed and evolve over time. Questioning things, critical thinking,
Right.
what we inherit and what we experience, and the data that we download very early on. So, as we were chatting before we started recording, I mentioned that my father was a survivor of the Nazi Holocaust. Yes. Well, I downloaded epigenetically. So that's the effects of genes in the environment, epigenetics. So genetic expression through the environment. I downloaded a lot of data from my father. I downloaded trauma. And then being born, I was observing and watching. That's what babies do. We pay a lot of attention. We're very smart when we're babies. We're still smart. One of the things that I learned from my father was how to question everything by observing, by watching, by seeing that there were multiple sides and multiple angles. My father was a very, very wounded man. He was full of sadness. But my father watched everything. That was a survival skill.
Exactly.
And survivors pay a lot of attention to the world. You know, the interesting thing, just look around us. There's only 3 of us at this table right now. There's a lot of survivors here. We've lived on the planet. We've learned what we need to attend to and what we need to pay attention to. And that leads to critical thinking. It's when I accept something as 100% true and unchangeable that I run into problems. Because I have to recognize that facts will evolve, that additional data will change what I conclude. And I have to be willing to see, observe, take in data. Oh, here, let me place this back over there. For those of you who can't see, I was putting my soapbox back under the table.
That was a
now.
soapbox?
Yeah.
Well, the last podcast, we talked a little bit about the educational system.
Oh, boy.
A lot of it. And one of my criticisms was that critical thinking doesn't seem to be a big part of what they support in those processes.
I think it's kind of hard to teach.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, can you teach it, or is it just something that's innate and evolutionary within our own experience?
I think you can teach it. I think it takes time, though. And it's one of those subtle things that our schools aren't good with subtle things.
Right. Well,
and you can't test for it.
Well, you can test for logical reasoning. In my experience, it's like, I went through all of this education, and then I'm sitting for the law school aptitude test, the LSAT. And all of a sudden, it's all like logical reasoning. And you realize how ill-prepared, and I did well, but I think that was just because that's who I am to some extent. But
you're logical?
I'm illogical at this point. I mean, we're talking. But I realized how ill-prepared, because I did take some prep courses, and it's like, and all of a sudden I'm looking at it a different way. And it's like, do you think is that what you're meaning by the observational aspect? Do you think the critical thinking and those skills can be taught, or is it more?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
There are a lot of thinkers in educational settings looking at pedagogy, andragogy, whatever word they're using now. But how do we teach people to think critically?
Right.
How do we teach students to expand the way that they understand the world? It takes work, and it takes a lot of, I think the word is dedication. It takes dedication from teachers, faculty, to be willing to put the time in to help each student learn to think critically. When I was on faculty at San Jose State, I lied. University of Washington, when I was studying, I found this organization called criticalthinking.org. I think that's their website. That's what I call the organization. And they have a lot of materials, wonderful materials about how to teach critical thinking, guides to critical thinking, small, easy to understand pamphlets and brochures and things that really help guide us in the critical thinking process, in learning to question, in learning to analyze more deeply. And as I'm answering this, I'm thinking that we're going back to also to privilege.
Mm-hmm.
Now, people think critically who lack privilege. In fact, suffering may cause us to think more critically than anything.
Mm-hmm. However,
If I'm not in a life situation where I can afford the capacity, what I'm doing right now at this moment is I'm thinking and speaking.
Okay.
And yeah, it's very magical. If you were here with us now, you would see a little bit of smoke coming out of my ears.
I see
Because
it.
as I'm saying things, I'm realizing that, gosh, I am trying to think critically and question what I'm about to say.
Mhm.
And is it accurate? Are there cases that tell me something different? Is there data that says what I'm about to say is not factual? And the fact is, I think we're born with the capacity to think critically and to analyze. That's what the cerebral cortex, the left and right brains, note I said plural, left and right brains, they're two different brains, those hemispheres. They need each other, and that's why they're connected. I mean, all the brains are connected, mammalian, reptilian, and the left and right cerebral cortex. We are born thinking critically, trying to understand things, trying to make sense of things. Yes, those skills develop as the brain develops well into our 20s, but we are born with that capacity to analyze and to question. It's how do we nurture it?
Okay.
I think that's
That may be the
I
question.
think that's it.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah.
Well, as we discussed before we were recording, we did a lot of discussing before we were recording because I messed up the audio so badly. I had my knobs turned the wrong way. I have fixed that.
I know a good surgeon who could take care of that.
Well, it wasn't a surgical issue, but I'll keep that in mind. What was I saying?
Knobs,
Knobs.
As we were talking before.
audio.
Yeah. Humans are born with a pretty crummy operating system in that we're completely incapable of taking care of ourselves. And we need to learn and be taught almost everything. Unlike a calf who is born and can walk a couple minutes later. A lot of animals have their entire operating system for their entire lives downloaded the moment they get pushed out. That obviously is a huge detriment to humans, but it also allows us to write the operating system as we go. And this gets back to what you were saying about creating new paradigms. The sky's kind of the limit as to what we can do and what kind of operating systems and rules that we write. As long as it's not encouraging more suffering, the idea for me, morally speaking, is discourage suffering and encourage happiness. Uh-oh.
I can't have the right side of my body without the left side of my body. I can't have sunlight without darkness. I can't have happiness without suffering.
It's very yogic. Two sides of a coin.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sold on that. Because a lot of people can have suffering without happiness.
Have you ever sat with a traumatized person full of angst, full of pain, ready to maybe toss themselves off of a balcony
No.
No.
and get them to laugh? Not that I'm trying to get somebody in that situation to laugh.
Right.
However, it will happen. And when that moment happens, that's when I know we're on the road to their safety. It's interesting. I love using computer metaphors for the brain because my brain is my computer.
Right.
And it's a pretty valuable computer. It's an amazing system. And I might modify what you said, if I may, James.
Oh, please.
Because I love this, but I actually believe the operating system is already there. We're born with an operating system. What we're doing all through our life is we're installing programs and we're uninstalling. The problem is, even though I may try to uninstall a program, there's lots of fragments that still exist. So updating my old out-of-date brain that I have through evolution, updating that brain is very difficult. It takes work. It takes persistence. That may be where the luxury is. That may be where the privilege is, that I can spend time doing that. pushing myself to understand things even more deeply. And what's interesting is that operating system that we're talking about has some, we'll call them manufacturer's defaults, default settings. I have a default setting that I'm going to continue to push myself to be more authentic and more authentic and more authentic, to be as genuinely authentic as possible. That doesn't mean who I was before was inauthentic. It was authentic for then. I continue to evolve into my most authentic self, and I will do that until I take my last breath of life. There's other systems, default settings, manufacturer's defaults, we'll call them. And I am hardwired to feel pride, joy, gratitude, curiosity, love and lust, joy, caring. What happens is life sometimes trips those defaults, sort of like a circuit breaker.
Right.
And I feel shame, fear, anger and rage, hate, other things.
I guess one of the points I was trying to make is probably better illustrated by some of the interesting research I've seen on how our brains deal with more complicated issues or ideas that we probably weren't evolved to deal with. I found it really interesting when they did a study on the brain to see when you think of someone being cold, it activates the part of your brain that is responsible for responding to physical cold. The same thing with hot. So it's interesting to consider that a lot of our emotions are based on sensory feedback or hardware that's designed to do something completely different. And this is the fascinating thing about the brain. Once you start understanding how we manipulate our own brains in order to have more interesting and higher level thoughts and emotions, how those higher level thoughts and emotions are far more abstract and less connected necessarily to reality. So we can create our own realities and we can respond to them differently. Some people have very strong opinions about a lot of very basic things, and I think they're failing to realize that their strong opinions are based on a really weird string of causality between where our brain's ideas start and where they end up. I don't know if I made any sense with that, so I apologize. And I don't know how you're going to follow up with that, so we can talk about something else. How was your coffee?
Human behavior. Black.
Do you need any more coffee?
Oh, I would love more coffee, but you don't need to step away yet because I need to respond, or we need to continue this conversation because this is much more engaging than any amount of caffeine could ever be. At least I'd like to think so. So human behavior fails to be unicausal. It's multi-causal. Mm-hmm. We do this all the time. We try to reduce things to single cause. This caused this caused this, because we're cognitive misers. I don't want to use too much brain power because there's so many things my brain has to pay attention to, which is why labels are so easy. If you're either male or female, then that's it. I've got two categories. Now I don't have to think so much, which is why I struggle with somebody who may be, or I may struggle, I should say, with somebody who is non-binary, who is gender expansive and questions what I believed I knew. My operating system is so primitive, and that those primitive aspects of the brain don't disappear. Mm-hmm. So if I don't understand something, I may go into fear-based response. It's that four-letter F word that F's with us all the time. Mm-hmm. Fear. If I don't know, if I can't read you, or if I feel cold, I may be perceiving this as a threat. So my body is going to do things to respond to a threat. It's very interesting because we're sitting here speaking into microphones, and nobody listening to this can see us. And what's very, very interesting, and I know Catherine very well, Catherine has not been speaking with her hands. She has not been doing what she usually does, nor have I. Mm-hmm. And I am very, very animated usually. It's a very different experience when you see somebody and they're gesturing with their hands and their hands are there versus if their hands were hidden.
Right.
What happens? How do we respond? That's my primitive brain going into is there a potential threat? Where are their hands? What do I have to worry about? It's just fascinating what the brain does. There is so much neurobiological research being done and neurocognitive research. It is amazing. And what happens in this computer, it doesn't tell me everything. Because we can't ignore the social world.
Yeah, I think that's a good point about the brain. Not only does it not tell us everything, but it lies to us on a regular basis.
It lies to us because it's responding. It's the old operating system.
Well, it might be better to say that it's an unreliable witness than that it lies to us. But I think it all goes back to the pattern recognition, which is what you said earlier. It's based on the brain is trying to get away with doing as little work as it possibly can. So it relies on pattern recognition in all kinds of ways, and that it makes it easy to put things in buckets and not really concentrate on them and understand them.
I just adore you, Catherine. What are you laughing at?
I don't know. I'm just laughing.
It's nice to see. It's so funny because when he said buckets, I went back to that old Monty Python skit at the beginning of one of those films. And I don't remember which film, Meaning of Life.
Which one with the buckets? I don't remember buckets.
Bring me a bucket. Just one more tiny wafer thin mint.
Oh, yeah. I'm going to go on a limb, and I think that was the meaning of life.
I think so. I don't know.
That ended well.
The meaning of life.
No, that scene.
The computer knew what to do.
The computer knew what to do.
In that case, I don't think it did. Didn't it wind up with him exploding?
It may have, yes, but
Hate to burst your bubble.
I just wanted to expel things that I didn't need anymore.
Oh, that's a good excuse for not remembering things. Would you like more coffee now?
I would love some more coffee. So this podcast, am I correct, is called Subrant?
Correct.
And we sort of were in the subconscious or something. We're having fun. But what's very interesting for me being interviewed is I'm so used to being the one who, in a sense, is in the driver's seat as a therapist. And I have to say, I've been sitting here and I've been watching. In particular, I've been watching you, Catherine. You've been somewhat quiet.
I have been.
But I know there's a lot going on in your mind. And I'm so curious your response to this conversation with, two friends who just met for the first time, and you've been watching this. What are you noticing? What do you see?
I just think it's fascinating because you guys just met, but both of you have just met, but I feel like I've talked a lot about both of you to each other, because I've talked about the podcast to you, Mischa, and I've talked about Mischa because I was really excited to have her on.
Well, you talked to her a lot.
Yeah, and I talked a lot about it, and I think I just wanted to see you guys, both of you interact, and it's just been kind of fascinating.
I mean, genuinely, it seems like you're a big part of her life because she talks about you a lot.
You are a big part of my life.
Aw.
You are. Very special.
Catherine was a part of something that is very difficult for some people to understand how truly significant it was. Yes, I'm a trans woman. Yes, I have had some gender affirming or gender confirming, as it's sometimes called. I prefer affirming surgeries. And there was one of the surgeries I had to spend about 7 or 8 nights in a recovery center, at the surgical center in one of the rooms. And every evening, I think after the first night when I was a little too loopy, I would call Catherine. She would be my last phone call, the final frontier of my day. And I'd lay in bed with the earbuds in, and we would just talk as I was waiting for the nurse to bring meds or something, or I'd get a little more loopy. Sometimes the nurse would come in for an exam, and I would let the nurses know I'm on the phone with a nurse friend of mine, and I would narrate what was going on, and I would hear Catherine would sometimes make a comment or ask a question, and then I would ask the nurse. But we would have these very, very, to me they felt deep. It may have been the
drugs.
The drugs, yes. But we'd have these wonderful conversations just about, meaning of life, what this surgery was meaning for me. And it's such an amazing transition. Interesting word choice right there. When we have surgery and the body matches the mind. I did not anticipate the level of what I'm going to call ego integration, my sense of self becoming so much more whole and complete and more comfortable. And there are people who've commented, who didn't know I had surgery, who've commented on how wonderful I seem and how I seem like I've been growing into myself. And I have friends who know I've had surgery, who I've spent time with, and they are just amazed by how much more comfortable I seem as a person on this planet. And we know that for those trans people for whom surgery is the right choice, getting surgery increases or improves their sense of happiness and well-being. We know this. Surgeries are a medical necessity for someone who wants to have surgery.
When you say we, I think you should understand that you're really talking to the trans community and the people who are around that, because it doesn't filter out into the general public that much. That message probably needs to get out more.
Yes.
So that
Yes, we for the trans community. Yes, thank you for that clarification.
Well, I think that's a big part of the problem. I think that's a big part of any big problem that we have, is that we don't hear the voices that we need to hear so we can really understand the story.
Exactly. Exactly. And I've learned so much about, through your journey, because when I met you, I remember the day I met you, we met at an art class. And this beautiful person walks in, and I think you had just started maybe on hormones. It was quite a bit back there. Or you had just,
I had been on hormones for a few months.
Just a few months.
And I presented in a very non-binary.
It was a very
sort of
non-binary, right. And so this beautiful person just walks in with this, I remember your hair was long and you had these little glasses on. You had on like a black jacket and, kind of black jeans and like boots, like knee-high boots, and this little tank top that said, "Queer as I want to be."
Oh, let me be perfectly queer.
Let me be perfectly queer. That was what it was. Let me be perfectly queer. And you just walked in and stood there and like you were, like literally did that. Like, I'm here, I'm present. I'm here, love me. It was just, and I thought, we are going to be such good friends. I mean, right at that moment, I just knew. And it was cool. And I was right.
So you walked right back into where I was actually leading you by asking the question before, which is fascinating because what I'm noticing happening here at this table, what I know is the second or the other, I should say the other most important thing in life. One is to be that we are our most genuine and authentic self, which is evolving, as I said, until we take our last breath of life. And the second is to love and be loved, to have connection. We're hardwired for that. We're born for connection. That's what makes us so wonderfully human, and it's so important, and it brings so much joy. And what we're talking about and what we're doing is connecting.
Right.
And it's just so wonderful, and I love that story because I still remember. I remember your smile in your eyes.
Oh, do you?
In meeting you, yeah, that was what I noticed, and those are things that our brains take those kinds of things in, and we say, "Oh, look, friend. This is someone with whom I want to connect," and there can be all sorts of reasons based on, past experiences and historical data that's been downloaded and that you remind me of or I feel, or there's just a sense, because the brain knows.
Yeah, our little jewelry class. And we kind of bonded over this neighborhood because you said we started talking about Coronado.
Yeah, because you lived here and I lived here, both of us in our pasts.
Right.
And now I do.
And now
Does that make me the winner?
Because you're still here.
Yeah.
Either the winner or the loser, because we moved on.
Loser?
I don't know. It depends on how much you paid for your house.
I bought it in 2011, so not a lot. Fraction of what it's worth now.
That's awesome.
We bought it at the bottom of the market,
Very
which is the way to do it. Couldn't buy it now. That does worry me a little bit, though. You're talking about those connections or being able to read her face and get so much information from that, because I worry with the younger generation, even before COVID, it seemed like they were being more disconnected and not talking directly to other people. It seems like it's only gotten a lot worse during COVID. Kids just don't know how to talk to and interact with other kids as well as I think as well as used to. I remember a few years ago. So we live in Cornell. I live right down the street from a high school. They get a little rambunctious when they get out of school, and sometimes they'll do donuts in the corner, and I don't like that. So one day I got really mad at this kid who's I am not much of I'm 145 pounds wet. I'm not much of a threat. And I was approaching, in a very angry mood, I was approaching this kid who's, got at least 60 pounds on me, if not more. And I go up to him, you can't do that here. And I was kind of yelling, and I was trying to be restrained, but I was explaining to him in a very forceful way that he's not allowed to do that here. And he couldn't look me in the eye. And I thought that was really weird. I think it goes to this point where kids today just don't know how to interact with humans.
Yes, and there's that word. I remember years ago, I used to be a lifeguard. I was a lifeguard in Malibu.
Wow.
Ooh.
And I was lifeguarding at a pool. And there was this summer camp was rented for a week. And I think it was bringing a lot of homeless youth for their week retreat. And I mean, I would observe and see these amazing, amazing experiences that youth would have who had never been up in nature, never been in the hills, never climbed a tree, and there was a pool, hence I was the lifeguard. And these two kids went diving in, jumping into the deep end, and neither of them could swim. And I got a little upset. And it was very interesting because they couldn't look at me. And then I realized I was making a big faux pas when I said, look at me. These were two Latino children, Latinx. That's respect in their culture.
Oh, to not look.
To not look.
Oh.
Now, I don't know what happened in your situation. Yes, you are right that there are different dynamics that occur in the communication that, the newer generation does. And I love how we can sound like our parents right now and say kids today.
Right.
When we were young, we weren't like that. Oi. Well, I'm amazed by what younger generations can read and understand in texts that I completely miss.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And thank God I have some younger friends because they've helped me a little bit with my very limited dating life.
Mm-hmm.
Limited in that that I like meeting people in person, and I don't understand all this electronic stuff. I mean, I cognitively understand it, and I know how to use it and do these things, but it's not the way I operate.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've had a lot of younger friends who are helping me to sort of understand what things mean and kind of get a handle on this, because I need to understand the different way all the younger men who are approaching me are relating. I mean, wait. Age-appropriate younger men.
What does that mean? Oh, you mean legal? I don't...
Yes.
Age-appropriate.
Yes.
Okay. Of course, that varies state to state. Not that I know. I'm just saying.
I know, right?
Getting old sucks, but one thing that I am racing towards is becoming that guy. Get off my lawn, you damn kids. I am already there.
Well,
So yeah, I get that I'm, I don't know, not the best person.
Well, I think it's time to do some xeriscaping in the front yard. Get rid of the lawn. You can avoid becoming that man.
But we don't have a grass, and see now I'm very objective oriented. So I'm blowing right past your analogy. In fact, I tweeted this one time. Don't use your analogies on me because I don't hear the analogy. I just hear the thing you're trying to say. Or not the thing you're trying to say, the thing you're actually saying instead of the analogy. Don't use analogies on me. They will always backfire. We have a xeriscape front yard. Get off my yard. Get off my xeriscape front yard.
Get off my cacti.
Get off my... Oh, actually, yeah, I hate
another
cactus, but that's a good reason to put more cactus in the front yard.
That's another T-shirt.
What? Get off my cactus?
Yes.
I think that's a bit of a stretch. Go for it, though.
Okay, I'm going to try. I'll try anything.
What were we talking about?
Oh, no.
Why are we here?
Connection. Why
Oh.
are we here?
Yeah. That's not really my forte.
Connection?
Yeah.
Which is so interesting because you were sitting on the front porch waiting for me. So I actually felt welcomed. But it's interesting because I moved my car across the street.
Mm-hmm.
because I was looking at where the direction I was parked and where the sun was going to come in the front window. The back window's tinted, the front window, and I thought, I should face the other direction, so let me park across the street. And so I said to James, as he's coming to greet me and watching me move my car from a perfectly good parking spot to parallel parking between two cars across the street. And he says, "Are you Mischa?" And I said, "Yes, I was just paying attention to the sun and wanted to park my car where it was going to stay cooler." At which point he looks at me and he says, "We're not in that time of year now."
Oh, you see, I didn't say it meanly, but because of the way I operate, it's just the way it comes out.
I can just hear it. Oh my god.
Well, and
It's
here's
not that
the
season
interesting
anymore,
thing.
Mischa.
It's not that season anymore. Correct. That's what he said.
I don't remember.
And what's funny is I wasn't bothered by what you said or how you said it.
Thank God.
But I immediately filed the data away about, this is somebody who operates with facts. This is somebody who's going to be very straightforward and direct. And what a perfect pairing with my friend Catherine, who was, as usual, late. I mean, who was late.
Say that. I knew it.
Who was late because of traffic.
Oh, right,
And I
because of
thought,
traffic.
Well, that's always the answer. I grew up in Los Angeles. You were always 10 minutes late. Oh, there was traffic. There was traffic.
Well, if there's always traffic, can't you account for that?
Exactly.
Oops.
Exactly. But literalist and very, very direct. And I said, this is going to be fun because what I was assessing was personalities. Oh my God. Is
Are
that
you
why I'm
judging
single?
me?
No, I like your personality, actually.
Please judge. No, I have no problem.
Yeah. We're always judging. by the way.
Exactly. I know.
I mean, I can't turn it off.
Yeah.
No one can. We're making appraisals continuously throughout waking life. The human brain is appraising and attaching meaning to things.
Right.
Which leads to one of my favorite expressions. Thank you, Hector, by the way, for this. Nothing has meaning except the meaning you give it.
That's something people should remember.
Who said that?
Well, my friend Hector said it to me, so I attribute that to him, but I am certain that he got it from someone else because, I mean, is there really original thought?
No,
unfortunately
there's
not.
No.
Sorry, Catherine.
I don't think so. Is there original thought? I don't think there's even original art.
Well, of course not.
Is there original sin?
You know, that's what we were supposed to be here for, is talking about art. That's what we come here for.
So what you're telling me is you wanted an art therapist.
I think we just need to start over. I think we need to start over.
Well, I met Mischa in art school, so.
Oh, well, I guess that's art related then.
Yeah. And Mischa has a very random collection of art.
Yeah, Mischa's an art collector. Mischa has one of my pieces.
Yes, I do.
But speaking about the car, love the car.
Thank you.
I love Miatas.
She is so much fun.
I've been in love with Miatas since the very first one in 1980 something or another. How many Miatas have you had?
I've had 3. This is my 3rd. She's a 2018 RF, so it's the Targa top, so it's the hard top that then becomes the Targa top. And she is sassy. Her name is Marlena.
Is it a stick shift?
Should there be any other kind?
Well,
Real girls drive stick.
unfortunately, when I brought a Prius, I had to go away from the stick. But that's the compromise you make with a Prius.
There's some low-hanging fruit, and I love puns, and I am going to walk away from it.
Why?
I have a manual transmission, yes.
Don't walk away from that. What-
Yeah, a manual transmission.
Anyway, yes, that's the way to do it, is for a sports car
Of
or any
course.
kind of car, unless it's a Prius or an Elon Musk car with the Tesla.
It's interesting how few cars are now available with manual.
It is disappointing, is
It
what
is
it is.
disappointing.
I agree.
It is disgraceful, and I'm not triggered. I'm just angry.
Oh, you're triggered.
Well, what's the difference?
You're
Well, I
triggered.
guess the one nice thing is I have fewer friends who say, "Can I drive your car?"
Well, that's the nice thing about it. They can't drive your car.
And the ones who drive stick, who drive manual, oh my God, they have so much fun riding my car. Marlena Miata.
Marlena Miata.
Mm-hmm.
And Marlena Miata has a new license plate.
Oh yeah. So you'll like this story.
This is hilarious.
So as I'm in my transition and I sold my house in the Coronado, I moved into a condo, I bought this car, I'm really, embracing my identity, and I'm thinking, what can I do for a license plate? And I'm like, I was, a queer activist. I do a lot of gender stuff. My business is even called Q, the letter Q, counseling. And so I'm like, Q, queer. What can I do with queer? Could I write queer? No. And then I think, oh, wait. Since as we know, I cannot be a cisgender female, I'm always queer, non-binary. And so I think, how can I make that into a license plate? Q for queer, NON for non, and the number 2. Binary would be like 0, 1, but I wanted it to be spaced properly, so Q non 2.
Oh, wow.
The day I was being followed on the highway by a QAnon supporter who was so happy to see this sexy little redhead in a sports car with the top down, holding up his QAnon face mask or flag or whatever he had, and driving by and honking and going, and I have this look of terror on my face that I could not get off the freeway fast enough. That was the day I decided to change my license plate.
And you call me and you're like, I am horrified. I laughed so hard. I still think about that and I laugh.
I don't know. That seems like a really good way to lead people down a road that they may not have picked for themselves, literally and figuratively.
Oh, yes. I think I would have been the one who would have been suffering more in that relationship.
Well, it depends on where you end up. If you bring them to a place with a lot of your friends, they might come out a different person. In all seriousness, I say that, but there was this wonderful woman who did a documentary about the extreme right, the white nationalists here in the United States, and she was going one-on-one with these people, and over the course of the documentary, she basically flipped most of them from being like running the KKK to getting out of the KKK and realizing that not all dark-skinned people are bad, and they became friends. If you want to do it one by one, you could theoretically deprogram all these people.
We are so, in this conversation, dangerously close to the idea that trans people can flip people or gay people can flip people, that we can turn someone into something who they're not.
No.
That's not what I meant.
And I know we're not saying that,
No.
but, it's very interesting and talk about survivor mentality. That's where my brain went, was you were talking, making sure we didn't go there.
Oh, no.
But it's so funny how, as a survivor, we immediately go there as part of our self-protection. Historically, what people have said things to me or done things or created these fallacies, that there are people who believe it,
Yeah, I apologize. I didn't think of that.
No. I know you weren't going there, but I'm just thinking about how do you help people to understand what I cannot do? I mean,
you're not a magician.
A magician? No.
You can't flip people like that.
Oh,
well, that's
gosh.
disappointing.
Well,
I mean, you're trained too.
I mean, when I'm working out, maybe I could flip them. But so in my childhood, I told you my father was a survivor of the Nazi Holocaust. In many ways, very simple. So the conversation when I met with him to talk about, like, how do you know who you're attracted to as I'm trying to figure out who I am, that was sort of beyond his parenting capacity. My mother, however, was... I used to actually think I was a therapist because I had such a crazy mother. It was probably more because I was my father's parent in epigenetics, and there's a lot of research that Rachel Yehuda has done and looking at survivors and survivors of survivors and all this. But so I was probably being programmed to be a therapist by my father because I was his parent. Going to my mother, though, who was, oh God, there's a word, batshit crazy.
Okay.
She actually would tell me directly and indirectly that I was going to be this horrible person, that I was going to do these awful things. And it was until I started building friendships in college, when I was no longer living in her house and I could start excising Beverly voices from my life. My mother was named Beverly, if you didn't figure that out. When I could start getting rid of these Beverly voices, I started seeing how insane it was. But when you're raised in this environment, it's amazing what you start to believe about yourself, about the world, when it's said again and again and again and again. And this goes right back, circling back to how we download data. You know, the environment that we live in, that we are raised in, teaches us so much. So I didn't even realize what my father was doing to me. I don't think he realized what he was doing to me. My mother was just vicious. So I became this person who is incredibly sensitive to others and who had an incredible amount of shame because of the environment she was raised in, I was raised in. You know, it's just fascinating. You know, and that's the data. And so part of what we do in our adult lives is we undo the damage that was done to us earlier in life.
Right.
And I'm not unique in that. All of us have to update the wiring, update the data, you know, and it's jolly difficult. We do it because we're hardwired to do it.
Now, you said epigenetics. Do you know the definition of that?
Epigenetics is the influences of the environment on genetic expression.
Right. Okay. I thought that's what it meant, but my mind lets go of things very easily, so I had forgotten that. And I want to say that I would have been very skeptical of the things you're talking about, epigenetically speaking, unless I'd seen evidence of it, and I have. There's some really fascinating studies that show the repercussions, genetic expressions that can be seen and correlated through the generations. There's a great study that showed that if a person's great-grandparents had suffered some kind of famine during their teen years, the grandchild would have noticeable gene differences in the way they respond to diabetes pressures as well as fat pressures. And so that was a very clear correlation. And so it just opens the floodgate to understanding that the genes are great, but they're not, I don't want to sound flippant, but they're not binary. Genes, there's so many genes and so many interactions with the genes, and the genes can be affected that it's not a clear science. It's not black and white. Not everything gets put in a box. Oh, I love boxes, by the way.
Human behavior fails to be unicausal. It's multicausal, even at the level of genetic expression.
Exactly.
So is that like generational memory, or?
I guess in a way it could be considered that.
I've heard that term like years ago.
I think it...
Kind of in relation to the Holocaust and different things. You know, it's like generational memory.
In some ways it sounds a bit woo-woo, but in some ways I think it could be supported. You know, I don't know if it's...
We look at transgenerational transmission of trauma. So, you know, I grew up in Southern California, and my father was a child survivor of the Nazi Holocaust, as were his two brothers. My father was the middle son of three boys. And my cousins on the Peck side of the family, my father's side of the family, I probably spent less time with them growing up than I did with cousins on my mother's side of the family. However, the things that connect us as cousins because of our parents, our fathers in particular, and how they pass down the trauma, there are things when we start talking as cousins about what our parents did or what we learned or how we handled things that are so peculiar and so very different than our other friends that we grew up with, you know, same place, same time, same school, who weren't raised by Holocaust survivors. You don't know that until you get together with other survivors and start to learn how quirky some of these things are.
Interesting. That's interesting. So let me just ask you a couple things.
Please.
I'm just going to shoot it. Favorite cocktail?
Probably a hanky-panky.
Okay.
Could be a green ghost.
I have no idea what either of those are, but they sound like that's the right answer.
I love a good Negroni as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll tell you, anything that Manny mixes up for me over at Restaurant Progress, those are some of the best cocktails.
Okay.
Shout
Shout
out to Manny.
All right. Thai or pizza?
I'm gluten intolerant and lactose intolerant. Which do you
I'm so
think
sorry.
the answer is?
The answer.
Tie me up, tie me down.
I mean, otherwise it would be that's like not a fair question to ask, I don't think.
No.
But at least you have an answer since you have some intolerances. Since you're very intolerant, I guess that'll do.
I know, it's ironic because I seem like such a tolerant person, and then there's just these clear-cut...
Oh, yes and no.
Yes and no.
I get the sense there are some things you will not put up with. Am I wrong about that?
Oh, have you met some of my exes?
Not that I know of.
Oh. Then, no, I'm very tolerant.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and the final question I have, and I think I know the answer to this also. Dog or cat?
You know, it's very funny that you say that,
Mm-hmm.
because I definitely am a dog person,
Right.
but the dog that I have and the breed that I am loyal to
Mm-hmm.
are the dog for cat lovers. I have a whippet, and they love to snuggle, to be on the furniture, to curl up with you, but I am more of a dog person.
Okay.
But cat tolerant?
Cat tolerant, yes.
Good.
Cat tolerant.
Good.
Yes.
That sounds good. Well, that's
Because we don't have cats only on our mugs here. We have them in our house, too.
Wow.
okay. Well, thank you. This was delightful.
This was fun. What a treat to spend a morning, or maybe even now it's an afternoon with the two of you.
Mm-hmm.
It's getting. Oh, it is afternoon.
It's
Look at
getting
that.
to be afternoon.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Mischa.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.